moving on to dampers. I know what I like out of damper performance. However, I haven't really experimented lately with damper performance, at least with the limitations in Gran Turismo. I've done extensive testing over 12 years. Let's see, 2006 to 2000, basically up to 2012, maybe 6 years of extensive testing and Live for Speed damper testing. I forget when I stopped playing Live for Speed. I've loaded it up a couple times in the last couple of years, but not all that much lately. But anyway, that's beside the point. I'm going to do some damper testing. I like really firm dampers, near 80% in road-going cars. However, this game does not allow for 80% critical damping. And I've talked about damping before. In order to understand what 80% critical damping is, you need to understand what 100% critical damping is, but you need to do some research on what critical damping is. I said critical damping a lot of times just now. And 30 to 40% is a reasonable range for racing cars with natural frequencies around 3 hertz, maybe 3.5 hertz, 4 hertz maybe even, because the spring system is so stiff, they need reactive dampers that are softer so that the whole suspension system can react to the bumps. However, with road-going cars, they're specifically designed for one, low grip tires, relatively low, so the non-racing tires, and two, high frequency bumps on the highway. So when you go down the highway, over time, just from people using the brakes on the road, it builds what's called braking bumps on the road. And it's just like if you've ever driven through a city center on a concrete highway, it just sounds like all the way down the road. And it's the car might run relatively smoothly on the bumpy road because of the soft natural frequencies they usually run with road-going cars. So how to make a transition from road-going cars to sports cars is sports cars that are designed for the track from factory, they also have soft natural frequencies. However, they compensate the soft natural frequencies with stiff damping. So let's say a Porsche, or let's talk about what I know for a fact, the Toyota Supra, the new one, is the Toyota Supra has adaptive dampers. I'm pretty sure most of the new sports cars, supercars in general, have adaptive dampers as well, where they have a magnetic fluid and a magnetically controlled fluid in the damper that gets firmer, or makes the damper firmer or softer depending on the magnetic state of the damper. So anyway, the car needs to run smooth on regular roads, non-race tracks. So they still need to put a soft natural frequency in the car from factory. And that would cause, if they left it soft, a problem with high grip tires. So if you're running the Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 Rs, or Cup 2s in general, on the road with soft natural frequencies, the car is going to be really wobbly, as I showed with the suspension setting video with these sports soft tires. And these are relatively comparable to those Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 tires based on times I've achieved at Streets of Willow and Big Willow. So it's pretty comparable. Maybe the sports mediums or sports softs, it depends on what you think is more realistic. So anyway, what manufacturers do is, to reiterate, they compensate the soft natural frequencies with firm damping ratios. Like I said, closer to 80 to 100% critical damping to prevent the body roll, because there's no other way to make the suspension any stiffer if it has a fixed spring rate. Another thing they do is they have a progressive spring instead of a linear spring, and it's a linear as in linear progression. So the graph of a spring would be a straight line that gradually goes up as the travel increases. So the force goes up as the travel increases. However, a progressive spring, the graph trace, I guess you could say, of a progressive spring, it goes up exponentially as the suspension travel increases. So that's another trick that sports car manufacturers do to increase the performance of the car while still allowing the car to perform well in daily driving scenarios. So anyway, with all that explained, I'm going to just experiment with these damping ratios. I normally like 40% in Gran Turismo because it doesn't go any higher. I would like 80% in the front, especially with a natural frequency of 2.9. Maybe I could even, with a firmer damper, I could lower the natural frequency and have the low natural frequency compensated with a firmer damper. And the reason why that is because of the anti-roll bar. It doesn't have a built-in damper. So a coilover spring is a coil spring with that's over a shock damper, right? And sometimes they're separate depending on the car. Like my Genesis has separate coils and separate shock dampers on the rear, but it has a McPherson strut front where it has a coilover in the front. But anyway, that's beside the point. The anti-roll bar does not have that built into the anti-roll bar. It's just a spring. And so with this limited to 40%, that means I'm damping the coilover to 40%, but I can't damp the anti-roll bar any more than I damp the whole system. So that's what causes the snappy suspension with having stiff anti-roll bars, is that normally I run 80% front damping, critical damping, and have a higher anti-roll stiffness in the front, but I can't do that because, again, the limitations of the damping ratios. So I'm going to lower this all the way down to 20. I'm going to lower all of them to the minimum to see how it drives. And I'm going to drive very sloppily. I'm going to swerve the car around a lot. And I'm just going to do this with the sports soft setting for now. I'm going to swerve around on the straights. Oh, my volume is really high. I can't hear myself. Okay. I'm going to swerve around. Okay. This will probably be a better test with the comfort hards. I'll do the test also with the comfort hards. So the car is drivable, right? If I drive smooth, I can still drive the car. It has pretty good performance. So I'm driving smooth right now, and its performance is basically the same, as long as I have smooth inputs. But if I try to get this wobbling, okay, that could be a factor of the sports tires, but I think it's the dampers. It's harder to slide the car with softer suspension, and the dampers cause the suspension to be softer if the dampers are softer. Okay, let's see if I can... Okay. It's a little bit wobbly. Oh, I want to see if I can get it to wobble in a performance situation instead of just trying to do a coneless slalom on the straight. It's hard to show because I like driving well. I have to intentionally drive bad. Basically, with stiffer dampers, sliding the car, it becomes more forgiving, more easy to manage. and less likely to get into a death snap coming out of corners. This doesn't have very much horsepower, so it's not going to over throttle very easily with these tires. Let's see. So there did it. I overturned into the corner, and the car is basically uncatchable in that corner. So I'll try that again, but this time with the firm dampers. So I'm going to max out the dampers. These would be my ideal settings, so I'm not really going to change any damper settings below this point. So as you can see, I'm sliding it, and it's tame. I caught the slide in a tame way. It didn't just wobble and snap loose all over the place. That's just due to the stiffness in the dampers. So I need to try and induce the slide. This is fourth gear. No, I don't know. It's in between. This is fourth gear. So here's a good place to slide it. And it slides pretty easily. I caught the slide. It didn't just snap loose like it did in the previous test. I can even possibly do some straight line wobbles. Yeah, it's easier to catch that. It slides easier, like it's quicker to slide, but it's easier to manage the slide, just like with having stiffer suspension, because the dampers do make the suspension stiffer. So let's try and toss this into the corner like I did last time. Pretty easy to catch. I went off track a little bit, and easy to, as you can see, it's pretty evident that the damper's stiffness makes the car easier to drive. Essentially easier to drive sloppily. If I drive smooth with soft dampers, it's almost the same, but the car won't slide easily with the soft dampers. So what do the dampers actually do in the performance of the car? So let's do some experimentation, some more experimentation. Right, so these are my ideal settings essentially, right? Stiff dampers. But there's different things that dampers can do. So if I lower this all the way to minimum, what that's going to do is cause the springs to rebound faster. Especially since this one is maxed out, it'll rebound faster than the front. This will make the car wobbly left and right, as well as lifting on the brakes, but it'll also lift on throttle lift. So if I'm at full throttle and I reduce throttle, it will cause the front end or the rear end to lift up quicker. So I'm going to try that. See how that affects the lift off throttle oversteer. If I can do it here. The problem with trying to achieve these effects with the dampers is that I'm losing all that performance of the stiff damper. Is that the stiff damper prevents the car from rolling and pitching so much, right? And if I'm using the soft rear rebound to get the car to rotate more, I don't have that stability. So it does lift off, rotate, lift off, oversteer easier. So it's not really oversteering hard, but it's controllable. But like I said, I can achieve this with a damper, but now I don't have a stiff rear anti-roll, not anti-roll bar, but stiff rear anti-roll effect of the damper. Oops, I took that terribly. This will be a good corner to test it out in. So I'm getting that lift oversteer. I'm lifting off the brakes, and the car's oversteering easier, and then I'm gonna lift off throttle here, and it points in. I don't know if that's noticeable. It's not drastic. It's not a drastic difference, but it's a noticeable difference when driving the actual car. Like I have the steering wheel in my hand, right? You're just watching me drive, so it's hard to notice what the car is doing. So now I'll try to do a lift oversteer into this corner. It's pretty high speed. Full throttle, lift, and the car rotates. So yeah, I can get a different performance effect by reducing the damper stiffness on the rebounds. It's called rebound damping. But just to reiterate, I now don't have the anti-roll effect of having the stiff damper. So let's try to snap the car into a slide again. See what that does. Oh. Okay. I snapped it into a slide there, and it was not easy to catch. Do another lap. I'm going to try and test it in the same corners I tested the previous setting at. Oh, a little late on the brakes. A lot of push on throttle in that corner. So let's see if I can get it sliding. It's subtle. Like again, it's subtle differences are hard to show in a video. So it is snappy catch there. So it wasn't easy to catch, but I did catch it. The car is oscillating a lot. I don't know if you can see, I'm doing multiple counter steers into the slide. Oops. Didn't quite. I caught that one with the brakes instead of trying to pin the throttle. Let's see if I can toss it into here. Okay, there it is. There's a clear difference than with the full stiff damper. A clear difference. I didn't catch that very easily. I had to use the brakes to slow down so that the car would eventually catch itself, rather than just catching it with the steering. So there's a clear difference between having that stiff rear rebound damping versus the full soft rebound damping. So obviously you don't have to go maximum or minimum. You could have a variation between. So instead of having it at 50, maybe you have it at 48. But that difference is not going to be very much. It's going to be a very subtle difference that I don't think anyone would be capable of. I mean, maybe the best drivers might be able to be capable of noticing the difference between 50 48% damping ratio expansion, that's what it says there, rebound damping, same thing, versus 48% damping ratio in the rebound or the expansion setting. So now, if you wouldn't want to have this very soft, as you can see, it was very hard to catch a slide by having the rebound soft. What else would you want to change? So maybe you want to reduce the front expansion, but that's just going to make the front end wobbly also. So I wouldn't want to lower that either. However, by reducing the front damping ratio expansion setting, try to read it as it says in Gran Turismo, that's going to cause the front end to lift up quicker. So this damping, the rebound damping, reduces the speed at which the front end lifts after compression. So if you picture the car lifting the front end, so scenarios where the front end would lift off the compressed shock, so that would be coming off the brakes and also getting on throttle. So that's going to affect that. And again, you can adjust that marginally from 50, right? Lowering it down to 30 would be a drastic change and probably make the front end very wobbly. Maybe I should try that. I have a lot of time on this video because I'm doing one thing, just dampers. I'll try it out. So I don't think it changed much. It should make the car more stable, accelerating out of corners. I don't think I'm going to be able to notice the difference because on the brakes, right, you can put down the full G-force, so 1.2 Gs, maybe 1.4 Gs depending on the tires, like with these tires. But with this car with 230 horsepower, it's only going to put down like less than half a G of acceleration on throttle. So it doesn't have the forces don't have a big effect on throttle versus on the brakes. So I'm not going to notice a big difference even though I made a big change with the dampers. Specifically the front rebound damping. So it's still rotating on throttle, but it doesn't drive different. Let's see if I wobble, I can catch it. Oh, went too fast. Has no problem in the slide. So all it really did was decrease the anti-rolling effect that the stiff damper gives the car, and it doesn't change the performance very much. Let's get to these high-speed corners after this hairpin. Toss it in. Oh, there's that wobble. A little bit wobbly on the front end. It's not as violent as the rear end. Toss it into here. A little bit too fast. Oh, way too fast. Anyway, it doesn't make a big change. Not a big enough change to warrant reducing the anti-roll effect of the damper in the front end. So now let's talk about compression damping, or what does it say in this setup? Yeah, compression damping ratio. So I'm going to increase this to 50 because I like the stability of having the high expansion damping ratio. Let's lower, what do I want to do first? Let's do the rear end first because it has the biggest effect on the car. So the rear end compression ratio. So again, this is an effect when the load is transferring to the rear or left and right. So again, I'm on throttle. I'm only going to put on like less than half a G in acceleration. So it's not going to have a big effect on throttle. So it's gonna, the biggest effect it's gonna have is on left to right transition. So let's do that. Okay. It's a pretty easy drift in the slow speed corner. And there is the snap. I couldn't easily catch the rear end because having the soft damper made the rear end wobbly again. So even though it's a different range of performance, it still made the rear end wobbly. It's only affecting the compression aspect of the damper, but it's still wobbly. Whereas before I was stuttering, I was easily able to catch the slides. Let's try here. There's a tame one. So there's a sharp catch right there. It suddenly regained grip. Didn't smooth the regained grip in that corner. Toss it into this corner, see what it does. Get it drifting, and it's wobbly. I didn't have a single motion to catch the car. I had to catch it twice. Oh, that was a bad drift. That's a pretty good one. Getting a sharp regain of grip. And I'm doing this test because, like I said before, the major effect the rear damper has on a car like this is not on throttle, but on left to right transition, because this has low horsepower. Okay, so let's say I wouldn't want to have a soft rear compression damper, so I've eliminated those scenarios of having a soft damper in the rear and a soft a soft rebound. So that's all we have left, is to try and make this soft, to see what the car does and is it worth doing, right? It's again, by making the damping ratio lower, it's going to make the car more wobbly left to right, and it's also, because it's the front, it's going to make the car dive quicker on the brakes. So let's try it. So these normally I would actually have this at 30. I like having, actually, let me rephrase that. Normally, I would like the front compression damping ratio to be at 80%, and then the rear compression damping ratio to be at 60%. But I can't achieve that. But I do like having firmer front damping ratios than the rear, and I'll get into that after this. I'll talk about it after this. Let's move on to this thing first. So this is at the minimum setting. That's going to affect the car on the brakes because it's in the front. It's a front compression motion. So let's check it out on the brakes. It doesn't make the car oversteer. So what did it do? It just makes the car dive quicker. If I want the car to perform different on the brakes, I would change the spring. However, this should make the car point into the corner really well. There's some oversteer. I'm getting some pretty good mid-corner performance because the loading transfers to the front more than the rear when I'm turning. But again, I would just do that with the springs instead of the damper. I'm sacrificing all that performance, the wobbliness, instead of reducing the wobbliness with the dampers, I've just made the car more wobbly. I think that was bad driving, but there was a lot of wobbling. I've made the car more wobbly, and I've gained very little. Instead, I would just, if I want to achieve this result with my preferred way, I would make the damper stiff and the spring softer. So I'd reduce the wobble with the damper, but I'd increase the front weight or front loading force with the springs. So the car wants to point in. That was weird. Again, that could be bad driving. So I need to do another lap because I need to test the car here. I'm not going fast enough. It's not really. Yeah. Maybe I can test it in these corners. Fifth gear, so third, brake, toss it in. Oh, it's bad. Bad initial drift. And this should be fourth gear. So the car rotates really well mid-corner, but like I said, I would rather achieve that with the springs and have a stiff damper. Get around to those fast corners real quick. Stay in fourth. So there's that mid-corner oversteer. I was on throttle and it was not pushing, but it was rotating in. So you can reduce the amount of push on throttle with the front compression damping. I wouldn't set it to the minimum setting, but having a varying range, less than maximum, I guess. Oops, took a bad line. Dang it. I think I'm going fast enough. Oh, I know, I was supposed to toss the car into that fast turn. Whatever, let's just move on. I'm just going to move on to my normal settings. The car is more wobbly, so as I was trying to prove. And I've had a few crashes, could have been due to bad driving, but let's toss the car into gear. That's supposed to be fourth. So maybe there's some performance to be gained from having a soft front damper. But like I said, just to reiterate for the maybe third or fourth time, it's better to get the cornering performance you want out of the springs rather than with the damper, because now the car is just wobbly left and right. And so what you could do is max this out, as I would do, and you can reduce the front anti-roll bar, or you can leave the anti-roll bar the same and you can reduce the natural frequency. So anyway, these are my general settings for Gran Turismo. I always set all the dampers for every car, the maximum in the front compression, maximum front and rear expansion, and 30 in the rear on compression. Because I like having a stiffer front damper than the rear, even though they're not my ideal settings, that still changes the way the car loads up. So there's transitional loading, and then there's peak G-force loading. And that is the effect of when the car is at peak turning versus approaching peak turning, right? And the spring rate is what affects the maximum loading. However, the damper affects the transitional loading. And if the front end is stiffer than the rear in the damping, then while the car is transitioning into maximum load, the front end has a faster tire loading response time. And if the tire loading response time in the front is faster than the rear, that will cause understeer. And in this case, it's a subtle understeer, so it's more like stability rather than pure understeer. And I like that effect in the cars that I drive. And so what I would do is have a relatively soft, so for this car, this is a relatively soft spring rate or natural frequency for these tires. So it causes oversteer on the brakes. And then I control that oversteer with having a firm damper in the front and a softer damper in the rear, so that it gradually goes into oversteer rather than suddenly snapping into oversteer. And that's basically it for dampers. I don't really know what to go into. Let's drive it as it is with these preferred settings that I like. In the car. Oh, stand forth. I don't think I need to go into damping with the other settings on tires. Maybe I should, because it's this kind of a series. Oops, too fast. Very easy to slide. Notice how smooth that slide was compared to the previous sessions or previous laps I've done with the different damper settings. Very good rotation on the brakes, even though the damper in the front is stiff. It's because of the spring rate. It gradually goes into that slide on the brakes instead of snapping into the slide. Okay. Basically, I can end the video right here, but I'm going to test these settings with the other tires. Oh, wrong tires. Or wrong. There we go. Comfort hards. Bring this down to 30. Bring this up to 40. And 50 for the expansion setting. And even though there's less grip, the spring rates have been compensated for the less grip. And that's a percent. Oops, I understeered there because I'm expecting to have more grip. So anyway, the damping ratio is a ratio based on the spring rate and the weight of the car. And so even though it's 50%, it's not the same damping. Oh, totally missing my brake points. So much more grip with the sports soft tires. Very smooth slides. What was I saying? Oh yeah, the damping. It's a damping ratio based on the critical damping of the spring. If the spring is softer, the damping is also going to be softer. So I can have the same damping ratio with different cars because they have different spring, what do you call it, natural frequencies. So let's throw this car into the slide here. Very easy to catch, especially with these tires. So when would you use soft dampers, right? I don't know if you've seen my other videos, and I play a different sim called Assetto Corsa Competizione, and that's a very deep, detailed simulator for GT3 cars and GT4 cars. And in the simulation of the suspension, I'm going to go ahead and switch the cars. I'm going to do the Comfort Softs now. In ACC, it's short for Assetto Corsa Competizione, they have detailed suspension simulation. And they actually have separated the components of slow speed damping and high speed damping. So if you notice, there's just one, there's compression and a rebound, right? But there's no high-speed compression and high-speed rebound. It's just one setting. In ACC, they have two settings for the damping. They have high-speed compression and high-speed expansion, or high-speed rebound. And those are separate. They act in different scenarios. So in the low speed, that is when you're getting on throttle, pressing the brakes, and turning left and right, meaning the spring is compressing and expanding at a slow speed, relatively, right? It's pretty quick, but it's slower than the high speed or fast bump and fast rebound settings in ACC. And what those do is when the suspension hits a small bump, it compresses the suspension really fast. And if you compress the suspension really fast, it's going to rebound also really fast. So you need to damp those separately, and which that game does. And on the bumps, generally, to have a smooth ride and have good contact with the road, that's when you want to have soft damping. So anyways, go ahead and change these. So if these had separate high speed and slow speed damping, then I could tune firm damping in the slow speed and then soft damping in the high speed. Oh, I never changed this. I'm going to change this to what is, I never changed the differential, 45, 30, 11. 45, 30, 11. There we go. And drive it. A little bit late on the brakes. Try to stay in fourth with these tires. No. Very quick shift out of that corner. Is this flat out? Nope. Excuse me. Oh, way late on the brakes. Okay, I'm going to toss the car into the turn, see how it performs. A little bit violent of a toss into that turn. Let's do this one. More gradual. Very easy to slide. Notice I didn't get into a tank slapper in those high-speed corners. And high-speed corners, high-speed slides are usually the, what do they call it, the most probable place to get into a tank slapper. Slow-speed slides are easier because there's less energy in the tire when sliding, so there's less heat in the tire when sliding at slow speed. So the car doesn't keep on wobbling. Now the replay. So to recap everything that I just went through in a couple sentences, is firm dampers makes the car easier to drive. If you want the car to drive different with firm dampers, use the spring rates and anti-roll bars to make the car drive different and keep the dampers firm. Till the next one.